of a local history roundtable that gets together local museum and library and archive professionals. We had a little challenge during COVID, but we're probably going to pick those up again. Tony can always send me an email in that regard. Rhiannon Sisson is the director of the Berrien County Historical Association, and I met her recently as she reached out to cooperate with museum and library and a number of different Masonic lodges in her county for a really well-received exhibit. I think it was a month-long exhibit on the Berrien County Masonic lodges. I don't know if she's going to include that in her talk, but one of the things that we got to know with Rhiannon is that she's a very adamant proponent of Masonic lodges working with their local historical societies. So without further ado, I'll start with Tony. And Tony, hopefully you're on. And yes. I'd like to introduce everybody to Tony Wright and thank him for coming today, but in case I forget to do it later.
That's all right.
He is the officer for the City Archives of the City of Grand Rapids. Tony, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Dirk. It's great to see you again. But yeah, I'm here to do the presentation, and whenever you want me to start, I can get started on the presentation of local government archives.
Go ahead and swing at it. I think we're ready.
Sounds good. And I think I may have given Brian my presentation, but if not, and it can't be shared, I should find a way to share it with everyone, but that's okay.
Let's see. Brian, could you, because I don't have the power to do it, could you make him a co-host? Or allow him to share screen? I'm not.
Tony, do you have a share content or share?
You should.
I should be able to. Let's see. I'm going to pull up. Let me see. Hold on.
I would if I could.
Let's see.
You should be able to now.
It says
the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, it says I'm able to share.
Yeah.
But it says choose what to share, but it says cancel every time. Let's see. Let me try that.
There it is.
There we go, Tom. We're good. I think we're good. Is everybody just seeing me like I am?
Yes.
You guys don't want to see that the whole presentation, trust me.
Once you start your PowerPoint, it should replace what we're seeing now.
No sound. Okay. If you could you email me your PowerPoint and I will try to do that as well?
It doesn't seem to let me want to share, so there might be some.
Okay. I have the power. I'll start the PowerPoint up. You did send it to me.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to start it up, that would be fine. And if we can navigate together, I think we'll be able to get through it.
Okay.
Great. And before we start, it looks like everyone has for the most part, but please mute your microphones. That way, the screen won't be shared. Anyone but the hosts and the speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And like I said, I'm Tony Wright. I'm the City Archives Officer for the City of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our facility is part of the City Clerk's Office for the City of Grand Rapids. And I myself have been an archivist for the past 24 years. I'm a graduate of Wright State University's Public History program, which was a graduate studies program in archives, records management, and museums. And for the city of Grand Rapids, we're a city of roughly 200,000 people located in West Michigan, not that far from Chicago or Detroit. So if you needed to know where we were, that's what you can know about Grand Rapids. And what I'll tell you about our archival facility, the city began the archives in 1981, and we were part of the Grand Rapids Public Library. The archives merged with the city clerk's office in 1996. And currently we're still part of the city clerk's office, and we are located in a facility in Grand Rapids called the Community Archives and Research Center. We share a facility with the Grand Rapids Public Museum, where they have their storage facility for their main museum, along with an archive that they have in that building as well. And we share the facility with Kent County, which is the county where we're located in Michigan. They have a section for their court records in the building. So the majority of the building belongs to the museum, with us having our archive and records management program, and then finally with the county. For us, we're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. by appointment only. It's just a change right now due to COVID. And as an archive facility, we average somewhere between 1,500 and 1,900 requests a year. This comes from both the public and city officials. And Brian, I think what we can do now is move to a couple screens. There we go. There's the introduction of me. That's a picture of our building, 223 Washington Southeast. This is the information I just shared. We can move on to the next screen. Thank you. Just an interior view of our facility. As many of you have in your archive and libraries, the storage boxes and flat file containers. That is showing some of our city commission records and village records. And Brian, if you can go to the next screen, please. I can tell you a little bit about some of our holdings. So for Grand Rapids, we do have the city records and the village records, which start in 1838. And our records go to roughly 2016 when it comes to our local government records. And that includes the meeting minutes along with supporting documentation, including contracts, deeds, easements, and petitions. We also have bound volumes of these meetings that are available for researchers. The reason that we keep records up to 2016 is at City Hall, we like to have somewhere between 4 to 5 years worth of records there. So they have ease of access of getting into items such as contracts and deeds. At times within city government, there are ongoing issues where they have to update contracts or in need of certain types of documents. And for us, the bulk of what we have comes from these minutes, because the history of your city goes through a board of trustees or a common council or a city commission, as many cities have in, around the world. And we can go to the next screen, please. And this is just a view of some of our proceedings. Some of the books are in pretty good shape. Some of the bound volumes go back to roughly 1850 when Grand Rapids was incorporated into a city. And we actually have the bound volumes up to 2020. And these are great for us and for researchers to look up previous contracts or previous laws that were developed or changing of the code of ordinances. It's just great to have these in our possession. We can go to the next screen, please. One thing that we use on a frequent basis are called Polk City directories, and it's basically the phone book. And with a new generation of archivists coming along, it's something we have them use quite frequently, because those that grew up in the age of the internet could simply Google an address and that information is readily available. But before that, we have a collection of books from 1865 to 2007. There are some gaps due to us not having the book or the company not publishing a directory in certain years. And these bulk directories give us information not only on businesses and residents, but it also lists the occupation during certain years for the people who resided at certain properties. And this information is very valuable. Also, like Grand Rapids and maybe some other cities throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we've noticed some cities would incorporate this change where they would update street names and even addresses of homes and businesses. So these books are very useful in showing the old street name and the old residence along with the new street name and the new residence. And the next screen should have some images of our Polk City directories. Oh, no, it doesn't. So it goes to court records, which we do have at our building, and it just has a few different types. We have the mayor's court, police court felonies, the justice court. We have police court, state cases, city cases, and for us in Michigan, we are part of the 61st District Court, and that is our municipal court. These court records are bound volumes, and what they allow us to do, and we've created an index on this, is sort of get a list of arrests within Grand Rapids starting around the 1860s, 1870s. And I believe our database currently goes up to 1970. And with these records, they are actually used, interestingly enough, for genealogical purposes. People are looking for family members who were sort of the black sheep of the family. And these records allow researchers the opportunity to see if was a certain family member in town at the time. Were they a bootlegger? Did they get in trouble for robbing a bank or something? And these records are very valuable to that. And we can move on to our next image, where we have a bound volume mugshot book. It dates 1928 to 1934. And as you can see in this book, there are pictures of the individuals that were arrested. And to your right, you can see the name of the person. It also gives their date of birth, the arresting officer, why they were arrested, and other information, which includes previous convictions and the system that they were using. And I, forgive me if I mispronounce it, but I believe they were using what was called the Bertillon system for a while. And I believe it was developed in France, where before fingerprinting was common with many law enforcement agencies, they used a Bertillon system where they would measure basically your head and other body parts. And they would say, well, that makes you almost easy to identify. So we know it's you. But what happens with technology through the early 20th century is, at the time they discovered fingerprints are actually better suited for identifying an individual than the Bertillon system and its measurements, which I'm not going to go into detail, but of course with fingerprints it's been replaced with DNA. But this is the way that they were entering in information. And what's nice about this collection is we've been able to digitize it and put it online. And if you want to, Dirk, I can provide you with a link, and I can try to do it in our chat session. We have a website for the City of Grand Rapids Archives. It's through a system provider called Omeka, and we actually have some of these up. And the reason we have these up is it gives us a glimpse into American history during Prohibition, the Great Depression. You have the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to northern cities, and Grand Rapids was definitely part of this. You have migration of people from Eastern and Southern Europe coming to the United States. So we begin to see more people coming from places like Poland and Italy to Grand Rapids. Also, what we have here are actually the only known images of these people. And this is very important for genealogical purposes, where people can find family members in an actual image. And like I said, this was a bound volume, and I would probably assume in height, it could have been 2 feet tall, a huge volume, which we had to take apart. And we've gone through the task of preservation, of repairing any damaged pages, cleaning pages. And by digitizing the images and taking the book apart, we're limiting people sort of getting their hands on it all the time. It was something people that would take a tour of the archive would love just to look through. And now that we've taken apart and getting it digitized online, more people can do research. We had a graduate student from Grand Valley State University, which is a university near Grand Rapids, and she took the data from the arrests and did sort of a statistical graph, which helped us out to get more data as far as, you know, the sex of the offender, race, the type of crime, and she did an amazing job just getting some very valuable data from this. If we go to our next image, our next screen, we also have fingerprint cards, which date from 1913 to 1974. Similar to what I just showed you, and these cards provide information, the offense, previous criminal record, address. Some have mugshots as well. We can move on to the next screen. We also have cemetery records. For the public cemeteries in Grand Rapids, some of the names are Greenwood, Fulton Street, Oak Hill, Oak Grove, Valley City, Woodlawn, and Fair Plains. With these records, we have a list of burials. We also have some accounting records, maps of the cemeteries. These are very valuable to genealogists and other researchers. We do not have records for private cemeteries. That would be more through the Archdiocese, especially with Catholic cemeteries that are in the Grand Rapids area. We can move on to the next screen. Oh, thank you. We also have personnel files for employees. Our records start around the 1920s and go to the present. We are compliant with the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. Any record that does contain what we believe to be sensitive information is subject to FOIA, and researchers must obtain permission through the city attorney's office. We also have a separate series for other departments, especially our fire department. It was just the manner in which those personnel files were kept. But for anyone wanting to know more about our rules on FOIA, there are records that are, I guess you would say, almost FOIA free, like the city commission records, like contracts and other proceeding minutes. People are allowed to view those, no problem. We'll go to the next screen, please. We also have tax assessment rules, not only for the city of Grand Rapids, but also the county in some cases and some of the outlying areas. And this is a great way for researchers to know more about the ownership of property around the area. And what also helps out with our tax records, especially for the people who reside in Grand Rapids, we have an index of cards, which I'll show you in a little bit, that are called assessor's property cards. And it gives information on a property, whether residential or commercial or industrial. It has an area that says date built. In some instances, we do not have the information on the date built. So we go back to these tax records and we can see when the property was built to get a fairly close estimate on the year that these properties were built. And then we can also move to the next card, please. And this is just to show you some of the bound volumes we have. The bound volumes go back to, I believe, 1855, 1860. And as archivists, we always know that if we're going to find important records, they're going to be stored somewhere absolutely awful. And these items were stored allegedly in the attic of the old city hall and were transferred to a barn. And I know they were in a barn because some of these still have hay stuck to them. And in some cases, the books are in bad condition, especially with the spine of the books being damaged. We can do some basic repair work to these books. Ones that require more professional care, we can send out to a professional conservator. We can go to the next screen, please. This is a shot inside of the tax rolls. We love the books with the typed out information, because when we open the tax rolls, we have to find information on the property based on the legal description. And as a historian, I don't mind going through the older books with that are in cursive, but at the time, some people had beautiful penmanship and some people had some of the worst penmanship I have ever seen. And it's also important for us to have new archivists go through some of these books, especially in cursive, because they are not using cursive that much in some schools, especially here in the United States. And it's just a great way for them to read these records and have an understanding, because as we pass along these permanent collections from generation to generation, these archivists need to understand everything from abbreviations and directories to reading and understanding cursive. We can go to the next screen, please, Brian. And this is the main part of our collection, which people request all the time. And if we go to the next image, Brian, I think we should have an image. Yes, perfect. During the Great Depression, we had something that was similar to a WPA project, or a project for people that were unemployed during the Great Depression. We hired people to go around Grand Rapids, and what they did is they took photographs of homes, businesses, and factories, and those are our residential, commercial, and industrial properties, and they created this system of cataloging homes. As you can see with the images in the top left-hand corner is the main folder, and if you go down, you can see the photograph of the home, along with some information on the date it was built, the type of materials used, classification, if it's a residential, how it was zoned. The left side of that card, you can see sort of a basic sketch of the property. This is incredibly useful information, and we have also digitized some of these records, not all of them, because we have some 55,000 folders to go through. And not only do we have 55,000 folders, we have roughly 5 to 20 pages inside those folders that need to be scanned. So it's quite an ambitious project, but we do have some of these scanned. The pictures you usually see are as early as 1936, and those properties which were incorporated into the city of Grand Rapids, and incorporation was really moving forward probably 1955 through 1961. The earliest image you'll see of the annexation incorporation properties would probably be 1961. This is a great resource. Not only do citizens use it, but people who do what are called phase 1 environmental surveys of properties look at these cards to see if there were any underground storage tanks, because as you know, filling stations, aka gas stations, were very common, and more, I mean, just all over the place in many cities. And in some cases, the underground storage tanks were never dug up. And in some of the factories and some of the homes, even certain businesses had storage tanks for oil to heat homes and other chemicals that were used for other businesses. So these are great, and probably our #1 requested item at the City of Grand Rapids. We can move to the next screen, please. Some of our other archival holdings that are popular, we have over 17,000 blueprints for properties in Grand Rapids. They date from 1978 to the present. And before I worked for the City of Grand Rapids, I worked for the City of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And we had blueprints that were originals and some that were on microfilm. And the microfilm started in 1928. And when I got to Grand Rapids, I thought maybe it would be a similar situation where they would have a nice collection of microfilm. They said, no, someone during the 1970s made the decision to throw away all the blueprints that they had on file in Grand Rapids up until the 1970s. So there is absolutely nothing available for a home or a commercial property or a factory pre-1978. However, working with other departments, we're making sure that we are keeping these blueprints and storing them at the archives. We also have historic maps of the city along with aerial images, and the aerial maps that we have date around 1945 to roughly 1953, 1955. And we also have plans, fortunately, for major highway projects that date from the 1950s and 1960s. We have various projects for sewers, and some of our city-owned properties, which predate 1978, they fortunately kept those records, but I don't know why they didn't keep the other ones. And we can move to the next screen, please. We've also reached out to the Grand Rapids Public Schools, and we have their archive at our facility. One of our goals is to build intergovernmental cooperation among institutions in and outside of the city. Grand Rapids Public School, we have some of their archival holdings from roughly 1865 to the present. It includes annual reports, yearbooks, class photos, PTA minutes, scrapbooks, attendance books. We also have records, some of the school choirs recorded albums during the 1960s. We have varsity letters and trophies, marching band uniforms to add to our collection. We do have these available to researchers. We ask that they make appointments. One thing that we've noticed, especially since we have yearbooks, people believe they're for sale. And we have to explain that we only have maybe 1 or 2 yearbooks from your school, and it's not for us to give it out. We know other institutions that have yearbooks. People have come into libraries, archives, and museums and have actually cut out pictures of their former classmates or themselves from yearbooks. So it's something we always need to monitor, but we're always willing to help. And we have a plan to digitize yearbooks as well, so they can be online for people to do research, or if you want to see your old yearbook, especially with all the class reunions that go on around Grand Rapids and they reach out to us. Having a digital yearbook is nice for them. And we can move to the next screen. That's one of our oldest records from 1865. It is a record of the students that were enrolled into Grand Rapids Public Schools. As you can see, in cursive, and we love having all of our interns go through it. And even some of our genealogists and researchers who help us, there are times where we have some just awful penmanship, so it takes a whole crew of us just to try to figure out what they were trying to write down. But it's a wonderful collection. And we've also picked up the Ottawa County court records from a neighboring county. We've been storing those as well. We can move to the next screen, please. And that's the end. And if you have time for questions or comments, I'd be glad to take them. And I appreciate you having me here for today's meeting.
Thanks, Tony. I do have a question for you. Brian, or I'm sorry, Mr. Who's controlling the meeting from here on out? Is it Tyler? Do we have time for questions? I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question anyway,
Go
Tony.
for it. Yeah.
Sure.
I think the archives are an important part. Masonic members are usually very strong participants of local government and businesses and things like that. So I often think that an archive is indispensable to kind of flesh out the story of our members. Tony, I just wanted to ask you, I don't know if you do this as a favor to me or if it's just common practice. Is a local archive something that perhaps one of the museum and library members could just kind of send an email and say, hey, I've got this name. Can you find out some information about that? Is it simple as that, or do they have to make an appointment and come in and see you?
No, I mean, if they want to email us, it's very common for us to receive requests by email. Sometimes people are looking for family members that reside in Grand Rapids, and they're just trying to connect the dots with family members. With Grand Rapids, it does have a large Dutch population. So from maybe 1 to 5 times a year, we'll have someone from the Netherlands reach out to us and say, look, I had a family member that was living in Grand Rapids. And with Grand Rapids' history, as we know, it was the furniture city for the longest time, one of the biggest producers of furniture in the United States. And many people would come to the United States to learn the craft. And so people would reside in the community for a few times a year. So it's perfectly normal for us to receive questions that are sort of like non-government related. People are looking for family members who may have lived in the area or have gone to school, looking maybe in a yearbook, just like I said, just trying to connect the dots on basic questions. And we're always happy to help. And if you can't get in touch with us, I mean, we do have the Grand Rapids Public Library, we have the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and every city with your library, your museum, historical society can always help with your research.
One more question, Tony. Actually, I just got a chat. If you could put on the chat your email address or some kind of contact information, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now, but I can type and talk.
Would you say that Grand Rapids is an exception, or do most communities have an accessible archive that we can access?
It depends on the city, because if you look at the United States, we're going to have, of course, with the federal government, you're going to have the National Archives, which does what it does. And when you go to the state level, every state's going to have their state archive. Now, once you get to the county and city, township, village level, it varies. Many major cities in the United States, I can think of places like Dallas, Seattle, Portland, they have an archives department for the city. And in other cases, it just varies. It's either a historical society, it's an assigned museum, or if I said the library museum, there's a historical society as well. Those are your general places where you can find it. And even in some other cases, especially a city that has a university attached to it or a college, their local history may have ended up there as well. It's uncommon for cities to have an archive, but those that do see the importance and the actual cost-saving value of it all, because running an archive facility is actually not that costly for a city like Grand Rapids. It's like 0.001% of the city's budget. So that's always a good selling point. And what's great about Grand Rapids is from the city commission through the city manager's office all the way down, it's supported wholeheartedly. And that's what's most important for a successful city archive.
Thanks for answering those, Tony. I'm going to leave the floor open for any other questions other members might have.
And in the chat area, I did leave my name, address, and also the link to the City of Grand Rapids website at Omeka. Someone did ask a question about cursive. I know that with my children in school, I've learned a little bit. Some students that we run across who are interns have some experience with it. Others have very little. And so you kind of have to show them sort of almost like different ways certain letters would be made. Like, well, it does look like a T, but it could be a P. And it's great teaching people. And more archivists who are getting into the profession are definitely brushing up on cursive. And that's great to see.
What type of budget does the city provide for archiving your documents? I'm sure it's quite a bit compared to what museums have to, the type of budget that a museum has to deal with.
I know with Grand Rapids, we have a city budget that numbers $152 to $160 million for an operating budget. Our budget for operations is roughly, depending on the year and any sort of building maintenance, it can run $250,000 to $300,000 a year. So that is not a problem for the city and not for the budget. I know some museums have much larger budgets. Some museums, what we like to call the lone arrangers, who work by themselves, have much smaller budgets. But we do have a lot of, I guess within our budget, probably with the, we do have money always set aside for if we need equipment, if we need storage boxes or anything like that. There's always money set aside for that.
Right. Some of us as museums and libraries, that we have a smaller budget to work with, and then we have to raise those funds to try to increase it. But I certainly understand. What type of acid-free, is there a particular supplier that you use over some of the others?
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, we work with companies, if you're familiar with Gaylord, they're an archives library supplier of acid-free containers. And there's also University Products and the Hollinger Corporation. So I believe it's gaylord.com. They're a company that provides to museums and libraries for supplies. I think it's University Products. I believe that's their name. It's been a while since I've worked with them. And then there's Hollinger, Hollinger. They are all suppliers and the ones that I use. And one thing we always tell our friends in archives who may be operating on a smaller budget is to always look out for state grant money, and even federal grant money as well. They have plenty of opportunities for people to get funds for any type of project. I know it can be kind of tough sometimes, but it's definitely worth a shot.
I agree.
Oh, and thanks, Rhiannon, for the links too.
If there are no other questions, I'll have Mr. President decide whether we should proceed or whether we want to take a break, how we want to work that. But I want to take this opportunity. If no other questions come up, Tony, thank you very much. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, Dirk, I hope we get to meet again soon. Just with how everything's been going, I think we'll be able to meet sometime again this year.
And I'm not sure how much I mentioned. I just want to make sure that everybody understands what the local history roundtable. Can you just give a little quick summary of what the local history roundtable does and entails, and kind of the networking opportunity that they might be able to take advantage of in their own communities if they don't want, if maybe they want to develop one?
Yeah, that's the what we have is called the Local History Roundtable. All archivists, librarians, archives, museums, libraries all come together and just network. I know that people can network through the Society of American Archivists or other museum organizations, but for us, it's local. We're Grand Rapids, 200,000 people. We have so many different types of organizations, or sort of what I want to say, libraries and museums in the area. And it's just a great way for us to get together and talk shop, because sometimes when you are with other archivists and other museum professionals and librarians, I think you can kind of get some things off your chest to a like-minded group of people. And also it's a great way to connect and to build relationships. And sometimes you do have the loner rangers who are doing it by themselves, and they'll have questions like, how do I take care, like if I want to deacidify an object, or if I need to clean an object, or who do you recommend that I digitize old film? You have that local community group who can just help you out in time of need. And there's also times where we've provided each other with supplies if needed. And I know there's a community in Grand Haven, which is an hour west. They had a terrible storm probably 4 or 5 years ago that sort of flooded their archive area, and we came out to help them make sure that they had supplies and whatever they needed to help clean up.
I just want to mention, I'm sorry, I just want to mention logistically, basically it's once a month getting together for lunch at somebody's facility. So we have lunch, we have nice informal fellowship conversation, and then we usually get a tour through any number of different facilities in the community. And it usually takes a couple hours a month. We have a chance to get together and reconnect and gather names and network.
Yeah, and we've been building over the past, how long has it been? 5 to 7 years. And it's been a great tool. Last year was the first time we didn't have a chance to meet. And what we would do to cap off every sort of meeting year is we would meet with the Kalamazoo group. We would drive south an hour to Kalamazoo, Michigan, or they drive an hour north to us. And we would take tours of their facilities, eat lunch with them, sort of build networks. And it was just a great way to kind of get the West Michigan archivists together.
So if the members don't have a local history roundtable in their community, they can feel free to kind of spark one together and reach out to the different archivists in their community.
Yeah, definitely organizations. Rhiannon shared the Society of American Archivists. You can find a chapter within your community. They do have different rates for membership. I would strongly encourage you to look into it. And there's also organizations for library and museum professionals. There's also the Midwest Archives Conference. Please feel free to check out those organizations. They're tremendous resources and can help you out in many ways. And also with your state archive, or I know we have some people from Canada, like with provincial, within your province, you should have an archive there as well, and they should be able to provide services and help out.
Thanks again, Tony. I'll give a 5-second count until I hear back from President Tyler and see if we want to move on or if any more questions occur.